The boardroom of Meridian Enterprises had never felt so heavy with silence as when Alexander Reynolds placed the stack of old documents at the center of the long mahogany table. Every member leaned forward, eyes scanning memos and policies that laid bare nearly 2 decades of systematic discrimination. Alexander's voice, steady but edged with steel, broke the tension. For 17 years I blamed myself for failing my wife Caroline, believing I was too absorbed in building this company to notice her despair. Today I discovered the truth. Her rejection was not an accident of circumstance, but the result of deliberate policy authored by Mr. Harrington himself, designed to drive mothers out of Meridian. Gasps rippled across the table, while Harrington's face turned ashen. Those were different times, he muttered. The company needed focus. Rebecca stood beside Alexander, her voice clear as glass. Times were different only because you made them so. The evidence before you proves that supporting families increases productivity. The Family Forward initiative isn't weakness, it's strength. She distributed fresh reports showing retention rates climbing, absenteeism dropping, revenues rising. Numbers that even skeptics could not ignore. James Whitfield, steady and loyal, cleared his throat. I move we adopt the initiative permanently across all offices and that Gerald Harrington be removed from the board effective immediately. The vote came swift and decisive. 11-3 in favor. Security escorted Harrington out as he sputtered protests, his legacy collapsing in the very room he once ruled. For Alexander, the moment was not victory alone but release, the weight of guilt he had carried since Caroline and Lily's deaths lifting as he finally did what he should have done years ago, stood up for them. That evening, news outlets blazed with headlines. Meridian leads corporate revolution with family forward policy. Competitors scrambled to respond. Journalists praised the unprecedented transparency, and working parents across the country flooded social media with gratitude. In his office, Alexander sat before the silver photograph of his late wife and daughter, whispering, "I think you'd approve. It took too long, but maybe some good has finally come from our loss." A gentle knock interrupted him. Rebecca entered with Emma carrying a box of cupcakes. "Mom says you won the big fight," Emma announced proudly, setting them on the conference table. "We did," Alexander smiled. "Together." Later, as twilight colored the Chicago skyline, Rebecca joined him by the window, the silver bracelet Caroline once wore now clasped around her wrist. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Alexander looked at her, then at Emma happily arranging napkins, and answered, "Professionally, we expand this initiative nationwide. Personally," he paused, searching for words that had been buried for years. "Personally, I think it's time I stopped living in the past and started building a future, with people who remind me that family is not a liability but our greatest strength." Rebecca's eyes met his, steady and unafraid. Emma skipped over, her voice bright with innocence. "Does that mean we're part of your family now?" The question, so simple yet so profound, hung between them. Alexander knelt to her level, his voice thick with emotion. "Families come together in many ways, Emma. What matters is that we choose each other." 1 year later, the atrium of Meridian's headquarters filled with applause as the Reynolds Family Foundation launched, dedicated to transforming workplaces across the nation. At the podium, Alexander spoke with Rebecca beside him as executive director, and Emma handing out brochures with pride. A 7-year-old girl taught a room full of executives what true courage looks like, he told the crowd. She reminded us that family isn't a weakness in business. It's our compass. The audience rose in ovation as Alexander reached for Rebecca's hand, the silver bracelet glinting, and on her finger now rested a gold band that matched his own. Emma wrapped her arms around them both, laughing as if she had known all along this would be their destiny. And so the man once known as a machine, the woman once dismissed as a liability, and the child once overlooked in a crowded lobby became proof that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with policy or profit but with love, courage, and the willingness to believe in second chances. 3 weeks after Victoria's dismissal, the noise had mostly faded. Meridian's stock price rebounded, and the press moved on to fresher scandals. Yet beneath the polished surface another battle was brewing. Harrington had not retreated quietly. His influence on older board members remained strong, and whispers of replacing Alexander with steady hands grew louder in private meetings. Then one morning a manila envelope arrived at Alexander's desk marked personal and confidential, slipped in by a courier who vanished before questions could be asked. Inside lay board minutes, memos, and personnel records from nearly 2 decades earlier. Documents from Harrington's tenure as CEO. As Alexander flipped through them, his hands trembled. Policies designed to drive women with children out of Meridian, memos instructing HR to use performance metrics that disadvantaged mothers, and most damning of all, a line in a board presentation. Wife of our CFO, Alexander Reynolds, has requested part-time return from maternity leave. Recommend denial to avoid precedent. Beneath it in Harrington's handwriting, tragic outcome. Ensure AR remains focused on work. Best distraction from grief. Alexander's vision blurred as Caroline's voice filled his memory. Her pleas for flexibility, her despair at rejection after rejection. While he, too absorbed in building Meridian, told her to be patient. All these years he had believed her accident was a cruel twist of fate worsened by his neglect, but now he saw it had been sharpened by deliberate cruelty from the man he once considered a mentor. When Rebecca arrived at his office that afternoon, he spread the documents across the desk, his voice raw. This is what we're fighting. Not just skepticism, but a legacy of systematic discrimination. She scanned the pages, her eyes flashing with anger. He destroyed careers, entire families, and now he's trying to destroy yours for undoing his work. For a moment silence hung heavy between them, then Rebecca said firmly, "The board will bury this as outdated policy. They'll dismiss it as history." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then what do you propose?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Transparency. We don't hide these documents. We publish them. We admit Meridian's failures, show the human cost, and then prove how the Family Forward initiative is correcting them. We turn confession into revolution." The idea struck like lightning. Radical, dangerous, unprecedented. Yet Alexander felt a spark of hope for the first time since Caroline's death. If we do this, competitors, investors, the media, everyone will know. Rebecca leaned forward. Exactly. They'll know Meridian is not perfect, but it is brave enough to change. Families like mine will finally see they're not alone. He studied her, admiring not just her strategic mind but her moral clarity. And for the first time in years he realized he was no longer driven by guilt alone but by the possibility of redemption. That night over dinner at Rebecca's modest home, while Emma proudly displayed her blue ribbon science project, Alexander told them both, "Tomorrow we face Harrington again. But this time we won't be defending, we'll be leading." Emma tilted her head, her pigtails swaying. "Like Batman?" she asked brightly. A smile tugged at his lips. "Exactly like Batman. No superpowers, just the courage to do what's right." Rebecca's hand brushed his across the table. A fleeting touch but filled with unspoken understanding. Outside, the city lights glittered. But in that small townhouse a new resolve was forged. The next day the boardroom would become a battlefield, and for the first time Alexander Reynolds welcomed the fight, not to preserve his power, but to honor the women he had lost and the ones sitting beside him now. At first the Family Forward initiative seemed like a quiet experiment. A handful of employees allowed flexible hours and emergency childcare support. Yet within weeks the ripple spread through Meridian Enterprises like a current no one could ignore. Productivity numbers climbed, absenteeism dropped, and for the first time in years staff spoke of loyalty and hope instead of burnout. But success has a way of stirring resentment in those who cling to the old order, and soon the walls of the boardroom echoed with whispers of discontent. Victoria Sloan, the elegant HR director, approached Alexander's desk one morning with arms folded and a folder of statistics in her manicured hands. "While Rebecca Harrison's performance is adequate," she said smoothly, Her circumstances: present liability. Single mother, no support network, recent medical issues. It's a pattern that will repeat. Alexander did not look up from the documents he was signing. Have you reviewed her evaluations? Consistently exceeds expectations, Victoria admitted reluctantly. But that does not erase the risks. His voice cooled, slicing through her objections. What you call complications, I call resilience. What you dismiss as liability, I see as strength. And the metrics prove it. She stiffened, unused to resistance, and left with a look that promised retaliation. That afternoon, his old friend and CFO James Whitfield closed the office door behind him. Alex, he began quietly, this isn't just about hiring a project manager, is it? I haven't seen you like this since before Caroline and Lily. The name was a blade, but Alexander did not flinch. Rebecca is qualified. The program is working. That's all that matters. James leaned forward. You've built walls for 15 years, and now a child walks in and suddenly you're canceling meetings, paying hospital bills, changing policy. Be careful. The board is restless. Outside the office, rumors spread. Senior staff complained about children in corridors, analysts grumbled about distractions, and some whispered of favoritism. Then came the blow that transformed whispers into a storm. On a gray Friday morning, Janet, his assistant, entered with a tablet, her voice unsteady. Sir, you need to see this. Across the screen blazed a headline from the Wall Street Journal. Meridian CEO's personal crusade. Business innovation or midlife crisis. The article quoted anonymous insiders, questioning his judgment, highlighting his unusual attachment to a single mother and her child, painting the initiative as reckless indulgence born of unresolved grief. By noon, Meridian stock had dropped 3 points. Phones rang nonstop with nervous investors, and television pundits debated whether Alexander Reynolds had lost his edge. In the middle of the chaos, Victoria appeared in his doorway, her face a mask of practiced concern. The board has called an emergency meeting at 4. They've specifically requested Rebecca Harrison attend. The implication hung like smoke. He picked up the phone immediately, calling Rebecca at her modest townhouse. Her voice was tight, weary. I've already seen it. Parents at Emma's school are whispering. She's asking questions I can't answer, Alexander. For the first time, she used his first name, and the weight of it struck him harder than the headlines. I never wanted this to touch her, he said hoarsely. Intention doesn't matter, Rebecca replied. Emma is 7. She hears the whispers. When the clock struck 4, the boardroom was ice. Gerald Harrington, the retired titan who had once built Meridian on tradition and fear, sat like a vulture at the head of the table. This morning's article has damaged our reputation, he declared. Clients are uneasy. Investors are rattled. And all because our CEO lost objectivity. Rebecca sat beside Alexander, her spine straight, her face calm despite the weight pressing on her. Victoria listed her accusations. Favoritism, blurred boundaries, policies rushed without vetting. Then Harrington slid a document across the table. Suspend the Family Forward Initiative. Reassign Miss Harrison to Cleveland. Distance yourself from this distraction. Alexander did not move, did not touch the paper. Reassignment would be constructive dismissal, he said evenly. But it was Rebecca who leaned forward, her voice cutting clear as glass. May I ask who leaked personal details about Mr. Reynolds' family tragedy to the press? Silence swallowed the room. Harrington shifted. That's not relevant. It is, Rebecca countered, because it reveals the ethics of those making accusations. James Whitfield added, before any policy debate, we must address the breach of confidentiality. Eyes turned. Victoria's composure cracked. At that moment, Janet stepped in, distributing copies of an email chain traced to Victoria's account. The evidence was undeniable. The room exploded in murmurs as Alexander's voice cut through like a blade. Victoria Sloan, you are terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Harrington's face turned crimson. You can't do this without board approval. Alexander rose to his full height. I can. Ethics violations fall under my authority, unless you were involved as well, Gerald. For the first time, the old man faltered. Of course not. And with that, the meeting dissolved in chaos, whispers and shifting alliances filling the air. Rebecca remained seated, watching Alexander with steady eyes. You knew this was coming, she murmured. He nodded once. I suspected. But I did not expect Emma to be dragged into it. For that I am sorry. Rebecca gathered her papers, her voice low but unwavering. She's stronger than anyone realizes. But Alexander, the battle isn't over. They will come again. He looked at her then, truly looked, and knew she was right. The storm had only begun. Rebecca Harrison returned to Meridian Enterprises the following Monday, still pale from her illness but dressed in her best navy suit, her posture straight though her heart pounded with nerves. The boardroom was vast, lined with glass and mahogany, and across the table sat Alexander Reynolds, whose expression, though controlled, held a warmth she had not expected. Miss Harrison, he began, before we start, I need to say this. Your daughter has been one of the most remarkable ambassadors I've ever met. A faint smile touched Rebecca's lips despite her tension. Emma has a way of connecting with people, but I'm here today to prove my own worth, Mr. Reynolds. He nodded, gesturing for her to begin, and soon the screen lit up with slides she had prepared before her hospitalization, project plans and efficiency models she had refined late into the night, strategies to cut costs while increasing output. Her voice grew steadier with each slide, and when questions arose she responded with clarity, citing data and real-world examples. By the end, silence filled the room, not of doubt but of respect. Reynolds leaned forward, clasped his hands, and said, Your qualifications are clear. But tell me why, after repeated rejections, do you keep fighting for a place in corporate America? Rebecca's eyes flashed with the determination born of hardship. Because I refuse to let my daughter believe that being a mother makes me less valuable. Because I'm excellent at what I do. And because comprehensive health insurance matters more to us than ping-pong tables or free lattes. The blunt honesty struck like a hammer, and Alexander found himself nodding. Then allow me to make a counteroffer, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were details of a new pilot program, one that would allow flexible schedules, remote work options, and emergency childcare for employees with family responsibilities. Rebecca stared, disbelief and wonder mingling on her face. You're creating this because of me? His voice softened. No. I'm creating it because 17 years ago my wife Caroline tried to return to work after our daughter was born, and every company turned her away. I was too absorbed in building Meridian to see the cost. I won't make that mistake again. The confession hung heavy in the room, and for the first time Rebecca saw the man not as an untouchable machine but as someone haunted by loss, trying desperately to set things right. She reached out, fingertips brushing the folder, and whispered, Then I accept. In that instant the Family Forward initiative was born. Not from a calculated strategy but from two lives colliding. A widowed CEO burdened by grief and a single mother fighting for dignity. When Rebecca left the building that afternoon, Emma ran to meet her in the lobby, hugging her fiercely as Reynolds watched from the balcony above. For the first time in years he allowed himself to hope that the changes he was making were not just for quarterly numbers but for a legacy measured in families, in second chances, and in the courage of a little girl who had once walked into his lobby holding her mother's résumé. For the next 5 days Emma became an unlikely fixture at Meridian Enterprises, her afternoons spent in a small corner office that Alexander Reynolds had ordered cleared and furnished with a desk just her size, crayons, notebooks, and a steady supply of chocolate milk. With Rebecca still recovering and reluctantly agreeing after Reynolds arranged a car service and proper supervision, Emma would finish her school day and then ride to the skyscraper where her mother hoped to build a career. At first the executives whispered, astonished to see a child skipping down the corridor of one of Chicago's most powerful firms. But soon curiosity gave way to something else as Emma's quiet presence began to ripple through the corporate walls. On Wednesday afternoon, Reynolds stopped by her little office and found her bent over math homework, pencil tapping in thought, and without looking up she announced, "Your operating margins could improve if you reorganize your supply chain." The words startled him into laughter, and when he asked where she learned that, she explained matter-of-factly, "Mom says talking her work out loud helps her think, and I listen, plus Diane gives me business magazines when I get bored." He leaned against the doorway, shaking his head in disbelief. "Most 7-year-olds read comic books." Emma grinned. "I read those too. Batman's my favorite because he helps people without superpowers." A laugh escaped Alexander's throat, genuine and unguarded, and it echoed down the hall like a sound Meridian staff had not heard from him in years. By Thursday, the marketing department was taking notes as Emma declared their latest campaign colors too dull for kids her age, and when Reynolds walked into the break room later that day, he found a circle of employees listening intently to her explanation of why brighter designs might resonate better. "Miss Harrison," he said gently, "I believe it's time for your daily appointment," and Emma obediently gathered her notes, skipping after him toward his office, where their ritual continued. An update on her mother's recovery, a carton of chocolate milk, and a discussion of what she had learned at Meridian. "Mom's coming home tomorrow," Emma beamed one evening, her small hands wrapped around the glass. "The nurse says her lungs sound better." Reynolds nodded, relief warming his chest in a way he rarely felt during quarterly reports. But then Emma asked a question that froze him mid-sip. "Will you still want to see me after Mom starts working here?" Her eyes searched his face with disarming seriousness, and when he hesitated she added quietly, "Dad didn't want to see me anymore. Sometimes people just stop wanting kids around." The simple confession pierced him deeper than any corporate betrayal, and for a moment Alexander Reynolds, the man called the Machine, felt his carefully constructed armor fracture. Leaning forward he said softly, "Emma, some people leave because of their own failings, not because of anything you did." He surprised himself further when he reached into his drawer and pulled out a silver frame untouched for nearly 2 decades, showing her the smiling face of a blue-eyed toddler. "This was my daughter, Lily," he explained, his voice thick with memory. "She and her mother died in an accident a long time ago." Emma studied the picture, then looked at him with pure clarity. "Is that why you get sad sometimes when you look at me?" He swallowed hard, fighting the rush of grief. "Absolutely not, Emma. You remind me of what's possible, not what I lost." And as the child nodded solemnly and reached across the desk to pat his hand, Alexander Reynolds realized that a little girl had managed to do what no merger, acquisition, or billion-dollar victory had ever achieved. She had reminded him that beneath the armor of efficiency still beat a human heart. Northwestern Memorial Hospital bustled with the rhythm of hurried nurses, beeping monitors, and the quiet tension of families waiting for news. Yet into that world of antiseptic corridors and tired faces walked Alexander Reynolds in his tailored charcoal suit with Emma at his side, the contrast so sharp that staff and patients alike turned to look. At the front desk, when the nurse began to object about visiting hours, Alexander slid his business card across the counter and said in a voice that brooked no refusal, "This is an urgent business matter. I need to see Rebecca Harrison." Room 317 was quiet except for the hiss of oxygen and the occasional drip from the floor, and on the bed lay Rebecca, her chestnut hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her skin pale with illness, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. Yet when she saw her daughter slip through the door her voice cracked with worry. "Emma? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be with Mrs. Winters." Then her gaze lifted and froze as she recognized the imposing figure beside her child, and color drained from her face. "Oh my God! Mr. Reynolds!" Before Emma could be scolded, the girl climbed onto the bed with practiced ease and explained with innocence and urgency, "I went to your interview, Mom, and he listened, and he brought me here to see you." Rebecca's mortification was immediate, her voice strained as she whispered, "You did what?" But Alexander interrupted with calm authority, Miss Harrison, your daughter made quite an impression. She presented your portfolio with remarkable poise. Rebecca tried to sit up straighter, fumbling for dignity even as the four tugged at her arm, and said quickly, "Mr. Reynolds, I am so sorry, she should never have." But Emma interjected with childish honesty, "But you worked so hard on your presentation and we need the job." The raw truth of those words filled the room heavier than the scent of disinfectant, and Alexander pulled a chair to the bedside, his sharp eyes softening as he asked, "You were at Westlake until recently. Why haven't you secured a position elsewhere with qualifications like yours?" Rebecca hesitated, then sighed. "It's complicated. I'm a single parent with no family support, and most employers don't say it outright, but they see that as a liability. 8 interviews in 2 months, 8 rejections. They ask what happens if Emma gets sick, if school closes, and it's always the same subtle dismissal." As she spoke, Emma gently adjusted the oxygen line at her mother's nose, her small hands moving with the familiarity of someone far too used to hospital routines, and Alexander felt a twist of guilt in his chest, memories surfacing of Caroline, his late wife, once begging for flexible work and being turned away by firms who only saw complications, not brilliance. The ache of that failure mixed with the sight of this determined woman fighting both illness and injustice, and finally he said with quiet resolve, "Miss Harrison, how soon can you recover?" She answered cautiously, "The doctor says I can leave tomorrow if my oxygen levels improve, but I won't be at full strength for at least a week." He reached into his jacket, handed her a card and said, "Then your official interview will be next Monday. And in the meantime, have the hospital billing department contact this number." Rebecca shook her head, panic flickering across her pale features. "Mr. Reynolds, I can't accept charity." But his voice was steady, almost gentle. "Consider it in advance. Meridian takes care of its people." As Emma's eyes filled with hope and whispered, "Thank you for helping my mom," Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in years. The gratitude of a child striking deeper than any $1 million deal. And in that sterile hospital room a seed was planted, one that would grow to challenge everything he thought he knew about business, about family, and about himself. Alexander Reynolds was a man who rarely allowed interruptions to pierce the precise rhythm of his schedule, a man whose salt and pepper hair and steely blue eyes were symbols of power in every Chicago boardroom. Yet that morning in the polished lobby of Meridian Enterprises he found himself pausing, his attention caught not by a major client or an urgent deal but by the soft, determined voice of a child. Diane, the receptionist, leaned across the counter with confusion in her eyes, saying, "Sweetie, are you lost? Where are your parents?" But Emma Harrison stood taller on her tiptoes and answered with the unwavering honesty of childhood. "My mom is Rebecca Harrison. She has an interview for the project manager position. She can't come because she's in the hospital, so I came instead." The air seemed to freeze as her words echoed against marble walls, and in that moment Alexander's gaze fell upon her, his 6-foot frame cutting an imposing silhouette as he asked calmly, "Young lady, what's your name?" When Emma lifted her chin and replied, "Emma Harrison, sir, and my mom says it's important to look people in the eyes when you speak." Something unexpected stirred in him, a flicker of amusement mixed with a pang of memory long buried. He studied the portfolio she pushed forward with tiny hands, saw the organized tabs, the certificates neatly placed inside, and for the first time in years he laughed quietly when she added, "Mom says I'm too young for coffee, but I know how to make it if you'd like." Against every rule of corporate protocol, against every instinct of efficiency that had defined him, Alexander Reynolds extended his hand and said, "Come up to my office, Emma. Let's hear what your mother prepared." Diane's jaw dropped, but within minutes the two of them were rising in the executive elevator, the little girl's feet barely touching the floor as she swung them nervously while holding the leather binder tightly on her lap. Inside the expansive corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, Alexander gestured to a chair far too plush for a child, yet Emma climbed into it with solemn care, arranging the binder on her knees as if this were the most natural place for her to be. "Tell me about your mother's qualifications," he asked, leaning forward, and Emma's small fingers traced the resume page by page, explaining in words far beyond her years. She has been a project manager for 8 years. She has a PMP certification and an MBA from Northwestern. She saved her last company millions before it closed. Each fact was delivered with clear conviction, and when Alexander asked why her mother wanted to work at Meridian, Emma did not rehearse a polished speech like other candidates but answered simply, "Because we need the health insurance, and because Mom says your company does important work that helps people." For the first time in decades, Alexander Reynolds felt a crack in the armor he had built since tragedy had stolen his wife and daughter, and as he flipped through the meticulously prepared project reports, his voice softened. "Who is taking care of you while your mother is in the hospital?" Emma hesitated, then whispered, "Mrs. Winters from next door checked on me this morning, but she's very old, and I can take care of myself. I've been making my own lunches since I was 5. The weight of those words settled heavily in his chest, and when he asked gently about her father, Emma only shrugged and said, "He left when I was a baby. It's just us, but we're a good team." In that instant, Alexander Reynolds, the man known for ruthless efficiency and heartless calculations, pressed his intercom and told his assistant, "Cancel my meetings, reschedule the board presentation, and find out which doctor is treating Rebecca Harrison at Northwestern Memorial Hospital." Emma's eyes widened in surprise as he stood and said firmly, "We're going to visit your mother, because any woman who raised a daughter brave enough to walk into my lobby deserves my attention." And as the elevator doors closed once more, Emma slipped her small hand into his, a simple gesture of trust that startled him more than any hostile takeover. For neither of them realized this unlikely alliance would soon change not only their own lives but the destiny of an entire corporation. Before the story begins, wherever life has placed you today, this message is for you. Sometimes the smallest act of courage can transform not only one life but an entire world. And as you listen, I want you to tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and whether you have ever witnessed a child's simple action change the course of events. Towering glass headquarters of Meridian Enterprises gleamed in the sharp morning sunlight, a 50-story building of steel and ambition, while down on the sidewalk a 7-year-old girl adjusted the straps of her small backpack and whispered to herself, "You can do this, Emma." Her honey-blonde pigtails bounced as she nodded with determination, the hem of her neatly ironed blue dress brushing against her knees, and in her hand she clutched a worn leather portfolio far too large for someone her size, yet she carried it with the solemn pride of a knight holding a sword. Inside that portfolio lay her mother's résumé, certificates, and presentation slides prepared late into the night despite fever and shortness of breath. Emma Harrison was not on her way to school that morning. She was stepping into a world of polished marbles, security guards, and tailored suits, a world where her mother Rebecca had dreamed of working, a world that had closed its doors to her 8 times in 2 months because of one simple fact. She was a single parent. Rebecca had been a project manager for nearly a decade, certified, proven, and admired by former colleagues, but after Westlake Solutions shut down, every interview ended the same way. A polite smile, a vague explanation, and another rejection letter, employers unwilling to take on the risk of a woman raising a child alone. And now that same woman lay in a hospital bed at Northwestern Memorial, her lungs struggling against pneumonia, her body exhausted from too many burdens carried alone. And so her daughter had made a decision that no 7-year-old should ever have to make. She would take her mother's place. Inside the lobby of Meridian Enterprises, executives strode past with eyes fixed on their phones, deals and deadlines dictating every step, and at the reception desk stood Diane, polished, efficient, and utterly unprepared for the sight of a little girl placing a portfolio on the counter and announcing with a clear voice, "I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Alexander Reynolds." In that instant, the old order collided with something unexpected, and far above in his glass-walled office, a man known as the Machine of Chicago Finance was about to discover that the most important meeting of his career would not be with a board member, a client, or a rival, but with a child barely 4 feet tall.